Well, the old girl finally left me stranded. Figured it would happen eventually. So these VFRs, as with, I mean, a lot of the Japanese motorcycles really, have an issue with charging systems where the regulator rectifier, which is back in here, goes bad. I've got one right here. This is not OEM though for this bike. I upgraded this to a MOSFET design, Shindingen, like really nice, reliable OEM unit. So I actually did this to prevent this. This didn't fail. I thought it did. Truth be told, I shotgunned a new one in there and didn't fix it. And that was partially because I was mad. I was on the side of the freeway. It was 100 plus outside. I pushed the bike a half a mile to get it under a bridge in the shade, and then I waited for a tow truck. So I was in the state of mind of pretty frustrated. Didn't do any diagnosis. I just ordered one. So let me show you a couple tricks. So with this plugged back in, you might as well leave it in place, and don't mind the wires. I'll explain later. I'm gonna go ahead and hook my meter up. My battery is more than fully charged. It's a lithium ion, so it runs a little high voltage there at the 12.9. You know, yours may be more like a 12.6. Of course, I accidentally just wiggled my lead loose, and I don't have enough alligator clamps, and I'm actually going to use 2 meters for this experiment, but I'm just going positive to negative here. Black lead on the black, red on the red. If I can get my coordination straight here. All right, so you see the 12.9, a little bit of an iffy connection. We'll go with it. When I turn this on, it'll drop down because the headlights came on and stuff like that. When I start this, the sucker should jump up like closer to 14. If it's lower when you start it, your charging system's not working. And that was a pretty quick diagnosis for me. Next step, and this is where I get to explain a little bit more. The regulator rectifier is notorious on these. I was familiar with it. I've replaced it on this VFR, my last VFR. This one I did preventative. Basically what happens is the stator on the other side of the bike is going to put 3 phases of AC current out. Those 3 phases are going to go in here. My connector is a little bit different than the stock one because I upgraded it. So I upgraded it with the Shindingen. These 3 wires are converted to this connector. For a stock bike, they'd be yellow. And those 3 phases of AC come in. This regulates it and it rectifies it. In other words, it makes it DC from AC. And then it's going to regulate, 14 volts plus or minus. And basically the positive current's going to come out here and it will produce, in a way, a negative, and that these 2 wires normally would go into the factory harness. What I've done, this is an upgrade kit. Yeah, I did this upgrade 70,000 miles ago. Okay, so these 2 wires go into a harness and they come around and they literally connect to the battery. So that red wire goes right back to this battery. The black one I actually run to a ground somewhere else. But basically, you get the 3-phase AC coming in, and then you get the correct amount of DC coming out. These bikes were notorious for bad connectors and etc. So I've eliminated all the connectors, and I just run straight back to the battery. Totally legitimate. That's why there's this big inline fuse. So I recommend this kit, and I especially recommend it now that I realize it didn't fail. I have a different issue. What I found as I got a little further into it and I pulled this fairing, these wires that I connected go down a little bit further into the original yellow wires. They're butt connected because I found these wires crispy, so they shorted. And I actually thought it might just be like a little bit of an overcurrent, maybe because the wire size was too small, and that was not a correct diagnosis. By the time I got into this a little bit more, I actually found my stator on the other engine case is actually shorted in this bike. And I can show you how to test that. So do your charging system test. If you're a 13 plus, 14 preferred, you're good. If that fails, then you can test this regulator rectifier pretty simply. You would actually want to back probe here and see if you've got the 14 here. If you've got the 14 here, but it's not getting back to the battery, you got like an open in the circuit. Kind of different. This does not ground to the frame. It uses the frame for cooling for the heat sink, but the actual ground is here. So that'll help you determine if the wires are bad. But if you really need to test this, you actually need to see what is coming into it from the stator, and that's going to tell you, is it the regulator rectifier, is it the stator? So I've got a no charge based on it not coming up 13, 14 volts. I would have diagnosed it as this, or I expected to diagnose it as this, but here are some of the tests to do. So I'm going to just pop this connector off right here. All right, I got this disconnected. So again, there's 3 terminals because there should be 3 phases of AC. The most simple test I would do, I'd put this on ohms to check resistance. I'd go ahead and pop this negative on a ground, and then we're just going to lightly probe the positive for each phase. If you look right there, 0.1 ohms is basically good continuity. I can prove it to you like this, right? I have perfect continuity from this. Let's call these phases A, B, and C. We'll start even with C, right? I have good continuity to ground. Shouldn't have that. Let's go to B to ground. I didn't have a good connection. I have perfect continuity to ground. That's a problem, big problem. And A, a little tough to do this. I need to get my alligator clip. All right, that's a fail, and a fail. And I would probably test that first. This is telling me that my stator's shorted because all these come directly from the stator. Now, if you technically, it could be the wire, one wire, it wouldn't short them all. It would short one. And that, because it goes through the stator, each of these are connected, but kind of in a weird way. It wouldn't give you continuity on one and the other two if it was just one. Kind of weird to explain. But because I have short on all 3 of them, I know it's going to be inside that stator. Next, what we could do is keep it on ohms, and then we can measure between the phases. And this one surprised me a little bit. So we'll go A to B. And I'm not jamming these in here and not opening up the female terminal. I'm just lightly touching. So I've got about 2 ohms, 0.2 ohms. So they're shorted together. This one, 0.2 ohms, they're shorted together. And that was one of the early tests I'd done. 0.3 ohms, they're shorted together. So this thing's shorted. There's no 2 ways about it. It's just, it is what it is. But I want to take this one step further. What I should do, I should check to see the AC output from the stator. So I'm going to land my ground right here, and I'm going to keep it there. I'm not going to show you that again. What I'm going to do is start the bike up. Okay, you'll hear it. Okay, I'm going to check each of these. Okay, oh, don't forget, put it on volts. Put it on AC volts. I'm making like 1 volt out of that stator. That was phase C. Let's go to B. I'm making 3 volts. And A, I'm making 0.8 volts. That is no good. And ultimately, really, that's the main issue. I'm not bringing in any AC from the stator. The regulator rectifier has nothing to rectify, so I have no charging input. Now, these may vary machine to machine, but this is more of a general. Any cars actually work the same way. We do 3-phase AC inside the alternator. We just rectify it inside the alternator, so we don't check the 3-phase AC because you can't access it while it's running. But But basically, really what you want to do is see if there's, you know, voltage here compared to the spec. This should not be 1 or 2 or 3 volts. This should be like 50 volts or 75 volts or 100 volts. It's going to be a lot higher than 1 or 2 or 3. So check that to your manufacturer spec. All right, my sweetheart stator failed. Getting ready to do the job. Just anticipate the job will turn out a lot better if it's clean. All right, so a little more background. I diagnosed as a bad stator on this. So I'm probably going to make this into 2 videos of how to replace, but also just continuing the diagnostic procedure. So this plug, which is aftermarket, these 3 wires coming from that stator, it should have produced 50 volts AC, and it produced like 1 or 2 volts. So that originates here in the stator. The stator lives behind that cover. I'm going to undo that cover. Oil's going to leak out. I'm going to need to put a gasket to seal it, and so if there's dirt and debris, it's just probably not going to turn out sealed. It's going to be an oil leaker. So I prepped it, ready to take it apart. So this won't be a real difficult job, but you know, I'm going to try to get it as clean and neat so I'm not dripping tons of water while I'm doing this work. All right, so I'm going to drain the oil, start unbolting that cover. Here's the new stator. So assuming my diagnosis is correct, this will fix the bike. So there's 3 sets of windings in here. And as the flywheel, which is inside, spins around it, it's going to generate a magnetic field, AC current, in 3 distinct coils. And that should be, like I said, about 50 volts. And then those 3 inputs of 50 volts coming out of this stator right here, which is in there, will go, it would have been this connector, right? Those will go over to your regulator rectifier, which is bolted right here. I've unbolted mine because I was doing the troubleshooting. That is going to come in on the 3, boom, clips right in. Those 3 50 volts AC will then be kind of like, they'll take the 3 phases, which are offset by 120 degrees of rotation, right? So every 120 degrees, it'll be the peak positive. It'll take those 3 phase ACs, make it into a DC, regulate the DC to be something like 13 point something volts, and that'll come out on these 2. So it's 3 phase AC in and just 12, we'll call it 12, air quotes, DC coming out. So let me see how this procedure goes. All right, so I got it cleared out a little bit, disconnected some stuff, tied it out of the way. Pulled a bunch of 8mm bolts. The one with the strap was here. Now I'm gonna go ahead and looks like it's got some prying tabs. So I'm gonna try to pry against something carefully just to break the initial seal. Yeah, I might go for this lower one up against probably what looks to be like a water pump or something. Yeah, all right. And I decided I would drain the oil later. I want to see how much oil I lose right here. So I did not drain my oil. The drain plug's right there. Okay, let me pry this off. I mean, I know it's going to be a fight because this cover has the stator in it and we're pulling it off of the flywheel, which is essentially the rotor, right? The stator is stationary. That's sitting over here. I kind of covered it up right here. Stationary. The rotor rotates, which is kind of like the flywheel that's bolted to the crankshaft. So just like I thought, it's kind of a little bit weird, but I'm pulling, it's definitely loose. I just don't have enough force to really overcome the magnetic field, so this is what you can anticipate. All right, to be honest, you know, my trade is really automotive. I don't typically do motorcycle stuff, but that doesn't look real promising. It's definitely got hot. It looks kind of burnt. So I'm already good with my diagnosis, and there's a million guys who could do this better than me. But I find a lot of times they're not really good at explaining the diagnosis. So the fact that I've already measured for 50 volts AC coming out of this, and I've got 7.7, 1, and 2 volts, I already knew this was bad. But seeing it's a little bit more understandable. You see, this thing looks freaking nuked. So there you go. Now let me swap this stator. I'm going to unbolt it. I got to chase the harness out. I'm going to tie a wire to the existing harness and pull my new harness through, or I'm going to have to figure out how I'm going to get that harness, because I'm not going to take the bike apart. I'm literally just going to attach to the wires and yank it through. Get it bolted up. New gasket, which I've got kicking right here. So there you go. All right, I knocked out the typical gasket prep, scrape in. I use a razor blade. You're technically supposed to use a plastic razor blade on aluminum, but if you're careful, you can do it like this. Both on the engine and on the cover. Now I'm ready to get that stator out. All right, stator's unbolted, but still connected to the wires. Right here, there's this grommet, and that's gonna pass through from the inner part of the cover to the outer. So I need to gasket prep this, get all that silicone off. And when the new gasket goes on, I also need to add some RTV or silicone type of oil sealant, like a liquid oil sealant, on there to make sure I get a good seal where it bumps up against the case there. So let me cut these wires and connect them to the new wires so I can pull it through. All right, I found it was easier to get this harness tucked in really good, with the stator itself loose, so I could manipulate it a bit. Now I can line the stator up. I'm looking through those holes. Right, now I got all those holes lined up with a bolt hole, almost. And I'll get ready right here. All right, so now with that bolted in, torqued, I'm gonna get the adhesive, the RTV, and I'm gonna set this double grommet in here like that. On the bottom, and then I'm gonna put a smear of it on the top, put the gasket on, and send this thing in without clipping anything. And so I want to do that off camera because I need to make sure I get it dialed in here. All right, all ready, gooped, set, lined up, fresh clean gloves, and I'm shooting it on. All right, it's in there. You can see you gotta get a little tight. But it's in, torqued. So this is the old stator wiring that I cut. And I misspoke. The actual strap, the bolt with the strap goes here, not here. It was there. So this is the new one. Now I'm unique because I've eliminated this connector. These connectors are known to be trash. So I can just cut this off. Otherwise, if we go in with a screwdriver, we could depin those. That way we get rid of the plastic so we can pull it through that tight area. So again, because I've eliminated this already, I'm just gonna hack it off, connect one wire to one of these wires, and then snake this baby through the spaghetti there. All right, here we go. A little tough fishing, but I'm gonna fish it through. Taped them together, so hopefully my tape doesn't let go. It'd be a nightmare. Come on, sweetheart. Alright, you get the idea. I actually had to streamline that a little bit. It does get a little tight in there. So now I can pull with my right hand over here and feed with my left hand over here. Alright, yeah, that came out a lot easier. Alright, so cut that a little close actually. But I did get it. That popped off right at the end. So these are my wires that need to be connected to that inverter, that regulator rectifier. It's all untaped. I ended up unpinning these, and the reason I did was just to show you. If you unpin them, right, and now you got them through, you'd reconnect them to that connector that I pulled off right there. And then you'd have a factory connector right here from your OEM regulator rectifier. But again, mine's all modified to be made bulletproof. Of course, the stator failed, but these three are just 3-phase AC. You can connect any one you want. So I'm just gonna probably lay this regulator rectifier in place, get the length about right, and then just hack the 3 of those off and heat shrink connector them on. All right, so I made those connections. I haven't heated them up to heat shrink them yet. Regulator rectifier is roughly in place. Checking my battery voltage, 12.4. Now before, when I started it, that number would drop lower. Let's see what I got now. That's at idle, 12.7, 12.8, that's coming up. So it's definitely fixed, but I wanted to try to rev it. Without shaking my leads off. Definitely know I got it fixed. I'd like to see it a little higher than that, but you saw it was around 13 volts, and before it would just be battery voltage, and that battery would get more and more and more dead as time went. Now, because this thing gave me a lot of trouble, and you know, I'm probably going to do this in 2 videos, but in the previous video, those wires were melted. I was going to put a regulator rectifier in it. I'm actually going to do a new regulator rectifier. A brand new Shindingen, which is actually not the OEM for this bike. I'm going to heat shrink all those, clean this all up, and then this battery has given me trouble before, so I'm going to put in a Shirai, a higher end one, because I can't afford to be left stranded like this again. So this should really have this bike rock solid. So let me get this in and get that thing all buttoned up, and then I'll see if I get any changes with the new regulator rectifier in the battery. All right, new battery, new regulator rectifier. So I'm a little happier with that. I was able to get it up a bit higher with a rev. So here's my final overall diagnosis. Initially, that stator failed. It definitely shorted, or in some way it's more than just it went bad. Like, that's why it's all cooked looking. I think it started to draw too much current and melted these wires, which I replaced, but that wasn't enough. And basically, because it did so much overcurrent and melted the wires, I do think it damaged the regulator rectifier as well. But I plugged the new regulator rectifier in, and it didn't repair it. So it wasn't just the regulator rectifier. I believe that it was kind of initially started with that stator getting too hot, shorting or causing overcurrent, melting the wires, damaging the regulator rectifier. And honestly, that battery, I haven't been super thrilled with these Amazon batteries. So I don't think this was a great battery. I think this battery being kind of bad might have actually helped cause the problem. It was causing that stator to constantly try to work as maximum. As the stator and the regulator rectifier are constantly trying to charge a battery that's not really helping. So within the system, the energy comes from the stator, the regulator rectifier, makes it usable, and the battery is kind of like a buffer to the system. The voltage should be pretty much the same because the battery has a lot of storage. But because this battery was kind of iffy, it was dead. Like if I left my lights on this bike for like a minute, that battery would be pretty cooked. You know, I'd have to pop start it. So shame on me for running that battery, but you know, these are kind of known for this type of issue anyway. And also I'm running a heated jacket and stuff. So I've been working this electrical system quite a bit. It basically needed every part of it. And you saw with your own eyes, yeah, with the stator in, it charged, but not really at a high voltage. And then I actually didn't show you, I popped the regulator rectifier in and it didn't really make any difference. It didn't get better until I also put the battery in. But if I were to have just done the stator, this bike would have been back to operational. It definitely would have been quote unquote fixed, but I think it still would have been potentially maybe put in a little bit of a strain on the charging system. So now that it's all hooked up, I expect it to be back to bulletproof. I'm just gonna check the oil because you saw I lost a little bit of oil. You don't really need to do an oil change to do this job. And I had just done an oil change like 500 miles ago. So I'm just gonna top it off, button it up, and go back to running this thing 140 miles a day. And I think I'm at 70K more or less now. I'll reset the clock now. Yeah, 70,887. So it's still been good, and I'm still in love with the bike, but just needed a little love.